Obviously, what we did is we used all these sorts of different papers that I prepared a lot of those, and from the looks of it, on Facebook and things, a few people have posted their work based on using collaged ink papers, and that they look amazing. I thought really nice work. So thank you for those of you that have shared what you've done, and if you haven't, please share your work, because sometimes it's sometimes you think, oh, it's not very good and things like that, but having a little bit of feedback on what you've been doing is really important, because it encourages you to do or to do more, or to feel a bit more confident about what you're doing as well. So today what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a bit of colour, but with a little bit of brush strokey sort of stuff going on, and blending going on the papers as well. And I had a bit of fun on Saturday just preparing a few papers to use to make a collage. And the interesting thing is, when you put the different papers together and you get the blends mixing together, it creates quite an interesting effect. Okay, so the thing to remember about this is you're not trying to produce the photograph or the image that you're working from. You're producing something a little bit different, perhaps even a little bit abstract as well. And then the intention after that is to work into these a little bit with acrylic back over the top. So if you haven't had time, or you just don't fancy doing the papers, then I have put those onto the website for you, and you can download those and print them off if you want to do that. Alternatively, if you haven't got a printer, what I suggest you use is magazines or found papers. One of the papers that I kind of fancy using for either drawing or working on is some old bags. A lot of bags these days come in brown paper bags, which is quite interesting paper to work with. So you could actually paint onto those and collage with those too if you wanted to. So I'll go over to, hopefully it'll take us over to my screen. Just give me a second. There it is. Yay! So there's the website page where I've posted the video. Just down along here, look, you can see the collage papers that I've made for you to use should you want to. We're trying to use a limited colour palette purely because it simplifies things. We're adding in the extra sort of idea of using collage coloured paper this time, so that obviously just complicates things slightly more. So using a limited colour palette is going to really help you just to make decisions that are more likely to be more cohesive or work together. So I'm going to play a little bit of this video, hopefully, if it works, and then we can just get an idea of how I did these papers. Now I'm going to enlarge it a little bit and see if that works. It worked a bit last night. It wasn't particularly good, but let's just see if it seems to be working all right at the moment. It's when I skip forward. So I'm using a watered down acrylic paint here. It doesn't matter what blues and things you use, as long as you limit the amount of colours that you use. So as you can see, yes, I use the watered down paint, and that was so that you get the effect of the brush strokes and things appearing on the paper. So I'm not trying to create a perfect flat surface. I'm intentionally making these look brush strokey and kind of loose and things. And then I am blending some of the colours together to actually get a variation on the blues and this kind of emerald, I think it was emerald green, can't remember now. And then I've used a bit of brown just next to it. So the other thing to look out for is creating contrast between your papers as well. Here I'm doing a glaze back over the top of a section as well, with a little bit of yellow in it. So I'm layering some of those colours together as well. On the next one, I use a bit of black combined with some greens and blues and a bit of white, because I really like the effect of grey in a landscape. Also, some of these blends that I'm doing here will actually be quite useful for things like the sky and rocks and things that I'm putting into a wall that you'll see in a few minutes. So the way to do a blend, as you can see, I'm working away from the last wet area that I put on and then going back over the top of it, and then you find that those colours mix quite nicely. Here I just put in a little bit of this purple paint that I've got, just to add a little bit of difference within there as well. And then you can also try out some different marks as well, a little bit similar to what we did with the inks. So different brush strokes. So I'm doing these kind of lineal brush strokes on here and letting them overlap with each other, one colour at a time. Oh, this is where it freezes, of course. There you go. And some darker brush strokes. So the other thing to remember is you want light colours as well as dark colours. And you'll see on the sheets that I've got, and I'll show you the other sheets that aren't on the video. I did about 5 altogether. Now I'm adding candle wax, but you can use wax crayon, over the top of a dried piece of paper. So applying it reasonably heavy. And then I use a lighter colour, and obviously this is white with a little bit of green in it and a bit of yellow just there. And then when that's dry in a few minutes, you'll see, or in a minute or so, 30 seconds maybe, you'll see me using sandpaper, and that creates this kind of nice weathered texture that you can use. This is a glaze, so watered down acrylic. So it's see-through, a bit like watercolour, over the top to create yet another sort of tint, if you like, over the top of the background. Oh, we're nearly at the end now. And on this one, what I did is a quick glaze once more. Sort of a dirty glaze of green. Back over the top, just creates a subtle variation. And then when the wax area is dry, which is next, then I get out the old sandpaper. Doesn't really matter what sandpaper you use, but sanding over the area that's got wax crayon underneath it and then paint dried on top, you can actually create a nice sanded effect. Sorry, it's slowing down again. That's what I was worried about. Wait and see if it catches up. There we go. I think it's going to stop again. But that's the basic idea, is to create a few textures, to create some brush strokes that you can then use in your work. So I'm going to show you now. We're going to go over to the wall, hopefully, if it works. Don't think it's working here. Just going to get rid of that. There we go. Right, so we're back over at the wall. So over the last few weeks, we've been drawing with chalks and charcoal and pencil. I've talked about my technique over here as well. Just add my pin. Sorry about that. Right, and then over here, this one, which was by the artist Susie Curio. Just move that to the front. This is more the approach, I suppose, that we're going for today. Something a bit more kind of raw. There is a bit more texture on this one than perhaps my landscape's going to have, but you can build up more detail a little bit later. So we're going to look at something a little bit more like this, because obviously it's got colour and it's also got texture on it. But the next thing is to look at Bernard, and I remember talking about this one with you last time, is Mike Bernard, just put it on top. Mike Bernard, who uses a lot of collage, but then works back into the details with his paints and things. So you can see, particularly down here in the bottom right, you can see that there's collaged papers that have been layered, and then little bits of paint and marks have been added. And down the bottom on the blue path, you can see there's perhaps a bit of scrunched up paper that's then been brushed over with a little bit of acrylic. So there's a little bit more to do in that we can add much more ideas and textures into our work, and then details afterwards, as well as colour. So this one, Sheep in Snow, which I talked about last lesson as well, you can again see this idea of layering. So you've got all these little bits of paper and things in the foreground, and then a lot of white paint has been applied to highlight the snow and the sheep in there. And you can see that little sheep in the foreground, the grey sheep, has got this kind of nice curve on it. So I imagine that's come from the paper, and I think that sheep just behind him has got some text on it. So obviously lots of different materials have been used and then worked into afterwards to create this really lovely effect. So we'll have a look now at what I've been doing and how to get started on this. So we'll go back over here to the desk. So this is the painting that I've photographed that I've chosen to work from. Here's a better view of it. And thing is to choose a photograph that has got good contrast in it, so light and dark areas, and has got some really interesting features that are going to draw the eye, even when we're going kind of a little bit abstract with this picture. We've got the sty in the foreground, we've got that little post, we've got a beautiful leading line up to the top of the mountain or hilltop, and then at the side we've got a really clear highlighted area with the white, and you can imagine collaging that and then adding white paint into that to really enhance it. So I'll show you how far I've got with this in just a second, but easy way obviously to get started is to either put graphite pencil on the back of your printout, so cover it in graphite pencil first of all, or put the carbon paper on the back, and then you can quickly get the outlines of your image so you've got the composition sorted as quickly as possible. If you're really into getting the drawing done yourself, you can use the grid technique that we've looked at before. But a really nice painting, we've got lovely detail in the foreground, and then a nice leading line up the side, and these nice shadows which you'll see in my version that I've been working on. So as I said, again, you can draw on the photo and transfer it straight onto your paper, and I'm using cartridge paper to do this. So here's the picture that I've done so far, and remember what I said, you're aiming for something that is an artwork and not just a photograph, so you might capture a lot of the realism within the picture, as in the shadows and some of the details, but at the same time you're looking to create something that's original and new and exciting to look at. So I found it quite exciting doing this, because I've got all these nice lovely brush strokes across the picture, and I've got some really lovely colours in this path, this rocky path that I'm going to add some rocks in there later. I've also got these lines from a scratched area that I made from the papers that we made earlier, and then over here you can see all my rocks. So obviously all of these marks here, all these colours have been blended and made on my papers, and then I've torn these rocks, and I'll add some more detail later. And then you've got the contrast between the posts as well. And the last thing I want to mention before you all get started is the contrast between the sky. So I use this kind of sanded back technique that you saw me doing on the video, which is this, and then in the background last night, just before I packed everything away, I did add a little bit of white paint to highlight this background in here as well. So lots of exciting things to try out, and you'll see me adding more detail in this with paper first of all, and then I'm going to work back into it with paint. So you'll be able to see anything you miss when I'm working. If you're doing your own stuff, you'll be able to see that on the video when I post that later on today. All right, so once you've got your outline drawn from your photo, then obviously you've got a map of where all the bits go, and keep using this to then trace out different shapes. So you know, if you've got precise shapes that you want to do, like this step here, then you can trace the outline of it and then cut it out. I tend to use a scalpel blade for that, but a pair of scissors is just as adequate. All right, okay. So that's what we're doing today. If you want to just a few students last night had fun making their papers and then just about got started with doing the collage part. So if you want to do your own papers, then by all means spend some time doing that, because once you start doing it, it actually gets to be quite a lot of fun, you know, blending and playing with the colors. All right. So does anyone have any questions on what I've just talked about?
Are you just painting the papers on like normal printing paper?
Well, I'll show you actually. That's one thing I haven't shown you yet. So I'll show you that. So these are the printouts that I did. I'll just come out a little bit. Whoop. So these are my the PDFs that are on the website. This is how they look when they're done, and it's just on quite thin printer paper. And all of the papers that I made are on cartridge paper. So these are a bit thicker and chunkier. So that's just normal cartridge paper. I happen to have some A3, but you can work on A4. You'll probably get a few more done that way. But the nice thing about perhaps using the wax crayon technique here, this technique that I did just here, I put the wax crayon down, or the candle wax down first, then I put the yellow paint on top, and then I just used an eraser. I just used a rubber to make these marks on surface whilst the paint was still wet. But even when it's dried up, you can still scratch it, so you can still add more marks over the top, but they're of a more scratchier quality, I suppose. And then these here are more kind of, they look wetter, they have a wetter sort of feel to them, I suppose, because the paint was wet at the time. Okay, that's fine. Any other questions? I'll tell you what, I'll show you something that I meant to show last night, and it's a book on collage. Here it is. So this book, if you enjoy collage and you want to find out more, this book, which I've had a little while, I just recently got another one, it's by the author Gerald Brommer, double M, and he wrote quite a nice series of books. This one was from 1994, so it's quite an old book now, but it has got like loads of wonderful examples of collage techniques and materials that you can use. He actually uses this stuff called washi paper, which is a Japanese paper, and he'll draw out his pictures quite carefully, and then he dyes the washi papers by just watercolouring them, and then he applies those on top, and then he'll work back over the top of that textured paper and coloured paper with watercolours, and he produces these amazing paintings. But in this particular book on collage, there's loads of examples of materials you can use, but also different artists that also do collage. So you can you know, if you're interested in that, that's a really nice book and very available on the internet, on Amazon and so forth.
You just show us the cover again, Jamie.
Yeah. It's called Collage Techniques.
That's it. So I'm just taking a picture of it since I've got a record of it.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, if you're interested in that, then that's on the internet.
I
was going to show
excuse
you.
me, Jamie. What's his surname?
Brommer. Brommer. Gerald Brommer. I'll zoom into his name.
Great, thank you.
There you go. Gerald Brommer. Yeah, I've had it a while, this book, and it's one of those books you can dip into to get inspiration and ideas. This is the other one that I've just brought, and it's got more about his work and how he does things. I was thinking of trying a little bit of the washi paper technique. They're old library books often, because they've been around a little while. But it talks, look, here's quite a nice, this is quite a nice page. So here he's dyeing his collage papers. Here he's planning out his technique. Here, look, I'll zoom into that one there because that's quite interesting. Is he collages his papers onto his drawing. And the nice thing about this paper is you can still see through it. So you can see your original drawing underneath, which you can't with the stuff we're using at the moment. And then look, you can still see details of his drawings. And then what he does is he works into it with his watercolors. So he starts adding detail into the painting. I don't think I'm getting any closer than that. So he starts adding details, and you end up with something. In this case, anyway, he doesn't well, as far as I know, he doesn't often do such brightly coloured pictures. But you've got these nice abstract qualities in the paper, and then you've got these beautiful, suggestive almost details in the foreground of a wall, and then finer detail towards the back. So you've got this. So your eye is obviously drawn to the house, and then you notice all these lovely colours and textures and mark making and patterns that he's put in. So you end up with this really lovely piece of work. So I'll show you another one. I'm aware that I'm talking a lot, not doing enough work. But here's another one. So he does do this more, and it looks very kind of traditional in a sense, as far as watercolor goes. But underneath all of this, we've got the collage as well, which you can't see as clearly in some of them. So a really inspiring artist who wrote quite a few books in his time. It's quite an interesting bit just here about using the papers. So look, you've got all these lovely creases and wrinkles that he's then worked over to get this effect of the rocks in his landscapes as well. So a really lovely book as well. There's something that's a bit more traditional, but with some kind of different qualities in them as well, and the reflections of the water or the cliff sides just here. All right, so I'll stop talking about that and start doing some work. So I hope you found that interesting. Right, so all speeded up then. So in this little bit here, what I'm doing is literally creating the outline of the composition, leaving some corner marks, just so if I want to line it up again I can do. So I do put in quite a lot of the rocks and things on here, and then later on I don't follow any of those rocks particularly, but I do look at the general size and shape of each rock when I put them in for the wall. So there, I pretty much got the outline of everything by just drawing around all of the details and then having a quick check to see if that's all right. So I basically got the overall composition. There's all my papers that I'm going to be using.
and you'll see me fiddling around with lots of papers. So I start off, I think, by doing the sky. So here's me cutting out the shape of the background, the mountain in the sky there. You can see I'm using greens and things which you might not normally expect to be in the sky, but I'm thinking more tonally, and also about the fact that I don't have very many other colours, so I don't have much blue in my colour palette. So I'm limiting my colour palette, and that actually forces me to be creative about how I'm using the things that I've actually got, which is why it's a good idea to sometimes limit what things you're actually using. And then I'm just building up the sky here. I've used larger bits, and somebody mentioned this in a class. You know, use larger areas, a bit like when you do drawing and things, you use larger bits of paper, or larger, you draw all the larger shapes in first when you do a drawing, and then you start to build in with the smaller ones afterwards. So I'm just getting in the large area of the sky. So there's the little bit of blue, blacky blue, that I've got on there already. And now what I'm doing is using some of the original paper. So I mix between original paper and printouts of photographs of the papers that I made as well, so I can basically print as many of those off as I want to whilst I'm working. So at this point, the painting, as I'm calling it, it's a collage, but I'm calling it a painting really. The painting does look quite abstract for a little while. I think the most representative part, or the turnaround with the representation, comes with when I start to add in the wall and the shadows on the floor. So you'll see me doing that in a few minutes. That's the sanded back paper that I've got just there. And I was just talking about how I used an eraser while the paint was wet to remove some of the paint on the waxed surface of the paper. So here we go. I'm just filling in a few more spaces on the wall, on the sky, sorry. And then here we go, adding in the shadows on the right hand side of the wall. So obviously the light is coming from the left, casting a shadow on the right of the wall. So adding a field just below the mountain or the big hill, and I'm getting here in this part of the project, I am using specific shapes. So this is a specific shape here of the path coming down the hill. It's going to be a rocky path a bit later on. I'm tracing the more or less the exact shapes. Don't have to be perfect because I can work back into them, as you can see me doing just here. And also thinking about the direction of the brush strokes. So if I want something to look a certain way, I make sure the brush strokes are going in the correct direction. So the brush strokes on this here are going to be the shadows on the ground, on the right hand side of the wall, as we said. So I've got all the brush strokes going across as the landscape does, and you can see there how that worked. But I'm just going to put in some lighter greener tones, and then I really enjoyed this bit because I like the way that all of the different brush strokes kind of interact and overlap with each other, creating quite a nice textural kind of exciting brush strokey pattern. And then we just apply the shadows over the top. So already now you can see the wall disappearing, even though I haven't done anything to it yet. See the wall disappearing off into the background. You can see the brush strokes on the floor. So we have got a sense of space and distance through the perspective on the wall at the moment. And now what I'm doing, I think, is adding in the shadows on the wall. Notice I've left a little bit of white just on the top of it, and that just shows that leading line, which is going to be a highlight eventually, which goes all the way up towards the top of that mountain. Off we go again. I was probably just talking to somebody in the class just there. I think now I'm going to be filling in areas on the sty, around the sty that is. What I do with the PVA glue that I'm using is I put it onto the surface first, get it in position, move the paper until I get it roughly or more or less where I want it, and then I can then I put glue on top of that, and it creates quite a nice hard surface when the glue dries. So I'm just filling in the gaps, obviously, in between the sty. And you can see the wall, a slightly different colour, it's very slightly different tone. But when I've got the sty in using these strips, and I did trace the strips out, but I didn't really need to as such, because what I can do, of course, is just cut a strip out and then put it in the right place because I've got it all mapped out. So I decided at this point it's time to, couldn't wait any longer, to put some of the bricks and things inside. A bit of grey mixed in with a few other greys because I did the blending at the start with my papers that I prepared. So I can put in a range of different tones or brick shades. Before then I crack on with the sty itself, going over the wall. I really enjoy working in this way because I like looking at the shapes and I like how the image emerges from what is a line drawing. Gradually starts to appear, but I also like the fact that you can work back over the top with other bits of paper in smaller, finer detail. So you can see the sty now is starting to look like the sty a little bit more, which is exciting. And the important thing was to maintain the contrast between the wood of the sty and the shadows on the brick wall, but also to have just a little bit of shadow in places just so that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb, so that it kind of blends a little bit. So because I've used a limited colour palette, I can actually add some of those tones onto the sty itself so it doesn't stand out too much. So I was just talking about the tonal ranges in the picture and how it's starting to come out. And I think that was just about near the end of our lesson on Monday nights. So we're going to be having a look in just a moment at the next stage of this painting. Right, here we are then. So this is day 2. As you see, my hair looks different because I had my hair cut. First time since lockdown. And now I think I just really wanted to get on with the bricks, so I do spend a bit of time now on the bricks and some other details on the path to the right hand side of the picture. It took me a few minutes just to find the right papers and to decide what to do. I'm just filling in some of the details around the sty, and what I'll be doing as well is just changing the size of those stones, of course, because as the perspective goes off into the distance on the wall, the details get smaller and more kind of stipply or indistinct. I wish I could work this quick. So I'm putting in the rocks in between the sty footholds. And you notice that I've also put some on the stones that I originally put on Monday. That's because I'm looking at tones and shadows in between on the rocks themselves, and changing the colours and things a little bit too. But yeah, it's fun. I'm enjoying it. Yay! So it's all coming together. It's starting to look like a stone wall a bit more now. Part of me felt, you know, I did this painting and I put all the stones and rocks and things in and all this detail, but part of me sometimes thinks, well, how could I have stopped earlier and left some of the details out? And the answer to that is probably yes. But sometimes, you know, you have to make a decision about which way you're going to go. I kind of like the result of what I did, because I just wanted to show myself that I could use all these collage techniques to create the sense of texture in the wall. And that was one thing that we looked at when we looked at the painting from Mike Bernard. It's how he's layered different colours and so forth on top of each other. And that was when the student arrived, and I just talked about how you can layer from the background to the foreground so that it looks like the paper is kind of overlapping and the background gives this impression of the background being at the back. So you start with the background and move forward towards the foreground. So it looks like it's coming together. Now, one thing perhaps you didn't notice is that off camera on Monday I did put some highlights just behind the mountain towards the back there as well. I used a bit of white paint, watered it down, and then just scumbled it until it kind of faded. So it kind of joined up those larger pieces of paper on the sky, brought them together a little bit, and also enhanced the skyline as well. So I'm just adding some details like rocks and things. I was originally thinking I'm going to do loads and tons of these little rocks by tearing and ripping the paper, which is what I would often do with my collage paintings that I do. And in fact I am doing that here. You can see me just with a strip of paper and a scalpel blade, so I just kind of tear tiny chunks of that off, and then here I'm adding the shadows that are cast by the sun on the right hand side of the little rocks on the path as well. And you'll see me in a bit working back into all of this with some stippling and painting and so forth to add further texture. Right, here we go. I'm getting some paint out now. So I used a bit of black, a bit of brown, and a bit of white. I didn't want to sort of use too many colours, because I just wanted to keep it simple and add the tones and shadows in. So you can see how I'm using the black paint here to just emphasise detail or shadow in between the stones, etc. I also water the paint down occasionally so that it's lighter, so that some of the colour that I have actually collaged comes back through the paint itself. So adding a few more tones. And it's important to note, of course, that I'm constantly looking back at the photograph. Even though all the stones aren't the same, the important thing to do is reference what you're looking at as far as tone and shadow, so that you get things kind of looking more or less how the picture does. So lots of stippling for the little bits of dirt on the floor, And then some opposite stippling in white. And it has got a bit of colour in it, the white. I did add the browns to it as well to make it more harmonious with the rest of the picture. One thing I would have done if I had a little bit more time, because I'm not working on this outside lesson, is I would have probably spent a bit more time painting the sty a bit more crisp, so that it kind of just looks more solid and things. But for the purposes of the class, this worked pretty well. So there's lots of little lines and stipples again in white, because that mountain at the background is, the path at the background there is quite pale. So I've used a lot of stippling, just little dots, to emphasise that path and just bring it out of the field of stony, rocky sort of pathway. And then I'm adding some shadows back into the stones, because again the light coming from the left hand side casts shadows everywhere, not just on the larger stones, rocks and the wall. So I'm working quite generally over the picture at the moment, putting in some more details, adding some highlights and shadows in places. And in a moment I do add a little bit of a glaze just on the left hand side of the first sty, and that glaze is just to cast a general shadow behind the sty, which just gives it that much more depth. So, and then a few more details with a few more bits of collage in there as well. So not too bad overall, and pretty interesting exercise, something that I haven't done before, not in this way, but using a lot of the skills that I previously learnt coming together. So a really lot of good fun, and when you've done yours, please post it, because I would love to see your success and your struggles as well, because we can all learn from it together. But thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.